In our previous videos, we focused on the younger years in the life of Lee Harvey Oswald, culminating in his end to attendance in the public school system in Texas and him signing a 3-year enrollment contract with the United States Marine Corps. We will now focus our attention on what occurred during the time Oswald was in the Marine Corps. Where did he train? What special training did he receive, and where was this training done? Where was he stationed? And finally, his eventual discharge from the Marine Corps. After Oswald signed his enlistment contract, he had to report to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. He traveled by bus from Texas to San Diego, arriving on October 26, 1956. His initial MOS, or military-oriented skill, was aircraft maintenance repair. Basically, he would be training to become an aircraft mechanic. But before any recruit can take part of any sort of specialized or advanced training, they have to first make it through boot camp. For some, they wash out and never become an actual active duty soldier. Not so for young Lee Harvey Oswald. He successfully completed boot camp in San Diego and then went on to his assigned training at Camp Pendleton, which eventually changed because Oswald did not become an airplane mechanic. He became an advanced radar operator. But we'll have more on that later. There are many aspects of training associated with going through boot camp for any military organization. But whether you are a Marine in the Navy or in the Army, you have to qualify on the range with a .45 caliber sidearm, a rifle, as well as a riot gun, more commonly referred to as a shotgun. Oswald's score on the range was .212, which was barely enough to obtain the rating of sharpshooter. On a marksman, sharpshooter, expert scale. In January of 1957, Oswald went from San Diego to Camp Pendleton with the same 8-man squad he had been training with up to that point. They all shared the same tent together at Camp Pendleton, so these guys were in close quarters the entire time they did their training, and one would think that later, when investigators were doing their due diligence to understand Oswald's personality or possible state of mind, that they would interview these guys. But only a single person was ever interviewed by the FBI. That person was Alan Feld. None of these Marines were ever interviewed by the Warren Commission. Feld said that Oswald continually discussed politics and was left-wing in his political beliefs. Feld also said that on 5 different occasions when the members of the squad would leave, they would all go together to either Tijuana or Los Angeles. But Oswald never went with them, and he always did his own thing. The only other person from Camp Pendleton who recalled Oswald and was interviewed by the FBI was Sergeant Donald Goodwin, who supervised the group of 20 men, which included Oswald. Sergeant Goodwin was a DI, or training NCO, and these men who train these young recruits are both feared and respected by the trainees. I can state this from personal experience. Goodwin told the FBI that Oswald was a radio communicator and that he, quote, owned or had the use of a private automobile and spent a lot of time and effort reupholstering the interior. Now, this is interesting because we know that Lee Harvey Oswald did not have a driver's license and he didn't know how to drive. We also know that Oswald's job was not in radio communications. It was in aircraft maintenance. The current Marine Corps designation for this MOS is 60XX. So, why would Sergeant Goodwin be so far off base with his assessment for Oswald's designated duties? Was he just misremembering his accounts with Oswald? DIs, or training NCOs, see a lot of bodies pass through their viewfinder as time goes by, and he could just be remembering someone else. Sergeant Goodwin says that he was with Oswald during the entirety of the 90 or so days that Goodwin spent at Camp Pendleton. In June of 1957, Goodwin was transferred to another division, and Oswald was still at Camp Pendleton when he left. Goodwin's recollection of the dates combined with the Marine Corps unit diaries for Goodwin sets the stage for yet another conflict and the overall timeline of Lee Harvey Oswald. Warren Commission Exhibit 1961 provides a list of all of Oswald's assignments while he was in the Marines, and that document says that Oswald arrived at Camp Pendleton on January 20th of 1957 and then left for training at a base in Jacksonville, Florida, on February 26th of 1957. But remember, Sergeant Goodwin puts Oswald at Camp Pendleton in June of 1957, and he's not the only one who disagrees with the Warren Report timeline. Alan Feld told the FBI that he was with Oswald at Camp Pendleton in March, April, and May of 1957. The Marine Corps unit diaries that lists the names of the Marines in each unit and their whereabouts says that Feld arrived in Jacksonville in May of 1957, which confirms the timeline statements he related to the FBI. In addition to Goodwin's and Feld's statements and the corresponding Marine Corps unit diary, Oswald himself provided a handwritten statement about his background to the Dallas police when he was arrested in 1963. In that statement, Oswald said that he served at Camp Pendleton from April to May of 1957. So the statements from Goodwin, Feld, and Oswald himself are all in conflict with the Warren Report timeline. Clearly, there is a discrepancy between CE 1961, the Warren Report's official timeline, and the recollections of Donald Goodwin and Alan Feld, both of which are bolstered by the actual Marine Corps unit diaries that show they were, in fact, where they said they were at the times they said they were there. There certainly exists yet another oddity associated with what the Warren Report reports and the testimony or statements by those individuals that were associated with Oswald at that time. And none of these various conflicts have ever been reconciled. After Oswald left Camp Pendleton, the Warren Report says that he attended Aviation Fundamental School in Jacksonville, Florida from March 18th until May 3rd of 1957. During his 6 weeks in Jacksonville, Oswald finished 46th in a class of 54 and was promoted from private to the rank of private first class. Oswald's next assigned duty station was Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, where he would learn about aircraft surveillance and the use of radar. This is where Oswald's initial MOS changes. Aircraft Maintenance Technician has a designated MOS of 60XX, whereas a Radar Technician or Radar Specialist is designated MOS 5948. Daniel Powers was Oswald's direct superior while he was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base. Powers' first impression of Oswald was that he was somewhat of a loner. He was meek and could easily be led, and his general personality would alienate the group against him. He was known as the frail little puppy in the litter and was nicknamed Ozzie Rabbit because of his meekness. Powers told the Warren Commission that Oswald would usually go back to New Orleans, which is about 2 hours away from Biloxi, every weekend. At this time, Oswald's mother was living in Fort Worth, Texas. The only person Oswald knew well enough to stay with overnight in New Orleans was his aunt Lillian Murrett. When one examines Powers' statements, it yet again raises inconsistencies between the documents and the Warren Report conclusions. Remember, CE 1961 says that Oswald was in Jacksonville from March 18th until May 3rd. Then Oswald took a train directly to Biloxi with Daniel Powers and other Marines. CE 1961 then says that Oswald was stationed in Biloxi from May 4th until June 19th. But Oswald's aunt, Lillian Merritt, told the Warren Commission that Oswald visited her briefly in late April of 1957 on a Saturday. They went to lunch, and Oswald told his aunt that he was going to be stationed at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. Then she dropped him off near the custom house near the river. She added that Oswald never came to visit or wrote any letters while he was stationed at Keesler. This adds even more confusion because Oswald was gone most weekends, according to his supervisor Daniel Powers. Yet Lillian Murrett says that he wasn't visiting her on those weekends. Once again, we have a discrepancy in the timeline. The train from Jacksonville to Biloxi was a straight shot. There was no time off between the two bases, so it's not possible that Oswald could have gone to visit his aunt in April of 1957, unless he drove there from Jacksonville to New Orleans and back, which is 450 miles each way. But given that Oswald said nothing to his aunt about Jacksonville, and there's no evidence that Oswald had access to a car, that doesn't seem to make any sense either. The easiest thing to do with all of this information would be to simply write off Lillian Merritt and say that she's wrong about the date of this visit, but she's actually looking at Oswald's diary to refresh her recollection while she's testifying about that. Some clarity can be provided by looking at the Warren Commission testimony of Lillian Moret. Commission counsel Albert Jenner gave Moret a document that he said was CE 540, and she had this document in front of her during the following testimony exchange. Jenner: Commission Exhibit 540 has a series of pages reported to be photostatic copies of the diary or the memoirs of Lee Harvey Oswald written in his hand and found by Dallas police in his room. Lillian Moret: Well, here's one that says he was... You see, when he stopped in that Saturday, we didn't know where he was going, but he said he was going to be stationed at Keesler Field. Researchers have tried to find the diary that Lillian Moret was referencing when she said, "Here's one," because it sounds like she's referring to a specific diary entry of Lee Harvey Oswald. It would be quite beneficial if we knew what she was looking at that made her say, "Here's one." But unfortunately, Jenner describes this as CE 540, and the exhibit that is CE 540 is definitely not a diary. So, in addition to the question about where Oswald was on weekends in Biloxi, and whether he actually visited his aunt in New Orleans before going to Biloxi, we have major inconsistencies in the Marine records themselves, as pointed out by the Warren Commission testimony of Daniel Powers. When Powers showed up for his Warren Commission testimony, he brought his actual written travel order documentation with him to the interview. Powers then read into the transcript a few key identifying numbers: 33rd, 83rd Student Squadron, course number AB 27037, class number 08057, Military Occupational Specialty 6747. The problem is that these numbers that were in the document that Powers read to the Commission do not match the same numbers for Lee Harvey Oswald that are in the Warren Commission volume as Folsom Exhibit 1. Specifically, on page 119, Oswald's orders dated May 27th of 1957 listed the course number as AB 27330, not 27037. The class number was listed as 2447, not 08057. Also, on Oswald's student summary of technical training document for Keesler, it says that he was in Military Occupational Specialty 6741, not 6747, and that he was in the 338th Student Squadron, not the 33rd 83rd. Now, either Daniel Powers was just making up random numbers from the document in front of him and lying to the Commission, or we have yet another confusing situation of the evidence not lining up with the other known facts. This reporter can see no good reason why Oswald's paperwork wouldn't match up with his superior's paperwork that was about Oswald from the same period of time. Can you? On July 9, 1957, Oswald reported to the Marine Corps Air Corps Station in El Toro, California, to prepare for a deployment to Japan. He departed from San Diego for Yokosuka, Japan on August 22nd on the USS Catamount and arrived in Japan on September 12th. From September 12th through November 20th, Oswald served at the Atsugi base, which had 117 Marines. Atsugi hosted the Joint Technical Advisory Group, which was an operations base for the CIA in the Far East. The U-2 spy plane was based out of 3 locations, 2 in the Middle East and 1 at Atsugi, Japan. Oswald was responsible for actually guarding the U-2 in the hangar. The U-2 flew over not just Russia, but China as well. This information about the Chinese U-2 flights was not a well-known fact. About a month after arriving in Japan on October 27th, Oswald shot himself in the left elbow when he dropped a .22 caliber Derringer, a non-military issued gun that was illegal for Oswald to possess, which Oswald had apparently acquired before getting on the ship. Paul Murphy, a Marine who bunked in the cubicle next to Oswald, heard the shot, and he rushed in and found Oswald sitting on the locker and looking at his arm. Without emotion, Oswald said, "I believe I have shot myself." This story was confirmed by 4 other Marines who were nearby: George Wilkins, Richard Shear, Jerry Pitts, and Robert Ogg. After Oswald accidentally shot himself in the arm, he then spent 2 weeks at the hospital recuperating from his injury. Then he was sent back to his unit for a November 20th, 1957 trip to the Philippines for 4 weeks. During this time, Oswald was promoted to the rank of corporal while he was assigned to a temporary radar station near Subic Bay in the Philippines. On April 11th of 1958, after Oswald had returned to Atsugi, Japan, he faced a delayed punishment for the incident he had with the Derringer from almost 6 months earlier. He was court-martialed and found guilty for having the unauthorized gun, which was only discovered because Oswald accidentally shot himself. Oswald lost his recent promotion to corporal and was sentenced to 20 days of hard labor, which was suspended as long as Oswald stayed out of trouble. Now, unfortunately for Oswald, he wasn't able to maintain good behavior for very long. On June 20th, Oswald almost got into a fight with Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, who Oswald thought had been responsible for him having to work kitchen duty in the Philippines, which Oswald hated. While they were at the Bluebird Cafe in Yamato, Japan, Oswald accidentally spilled his drink on Sergeant Rodriguez, which led Rodriguez to stand up and shove Oswald. At that point, Oswald, who admitted that he was rather drunk, asked Rodriguez if he wanted to take it outside to go fight. This incident led Oswald being court-martialed yet again on June 27th for using provoking words toward a superior non-commissioned officer. He was sentenced to 28 days of hard labor and a $55 fine. He also had to serve another 20 days of hard labor, which had previously been suspended from the accidental Derringer discharge incident. The next stop for Private First Class Oswald was most likely Taiwan, although, as you will discover, Oswald's time in Taiwan is the most disputed period of time during his Marine service. One night, while on guard duty in Taiwan, Oswald began firing his rifle at shadows in the woods. When Lieutenant Charles Rhodes reached him, Oswald was slumped against a tree, shaking and crying. He told Rhodes that he had seen men in the woods that he challenged with the standard halt and identify command that all soldiers know of from their training. He then started shooting into the woods. As Oswald was walked back to his tent, he kept repeating that he could no longer bear being on guard duty. Oswald was then sent back to Japan to recuperate, ultimately returning to Atsugi on October 5, 1958. Lieutenant Rhodes said that he thought Oswald staged the entire episode on purpose just so he could be sent back to Japan, which, as it turns out, is exactly what happened. This incident in Taiwan is not mentioned in the Warren Report. All that the Warren Report says about this period of time is that Oswald left Atsugi for the South China Sea on September 14th and was in Taiwan on September 30th, and then he returned to Atsugi on October 5th. There is no discussion at all of Oswald shooting in the woods and freaking out. That anecdote apparently became famous from Edward Epstein's book Legend: The Secret World of Lee Harvey Oswald. Gerald Posner and Vincent Bugliusi repeated the Taiwan Guard duty freak-out story in their books, which both are strong proponents of the Warren Report version of events. Now, despite the Warren Report claiming that Oswald was in Taiwan, and despite Posner and Bugliusi embracing the Warren Report narrative, there is reason to believe that Oswald never traveled to Taiwan at all. On September 16, 1958, 2 days after the Warren report says Oswald left Atsugi for Taiwan, medical records show that Oswald saw the senior medical officer at Atsugi, Captain Geranium, about a painful urinary discharge that he was having. Captain Geranium diagnosed Oswald with gonorrhea and prescribed 3 days of penicillin. Oswald had the clap. Oswald was again treated for gonorrhea on September 20th, September 22nd, September 23rd, and on September 29th. All of these medical records also have Oswald's identification number on them, 1653230. So we know they're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. So what exactly is going on with all of this? Oswald had gonorrhea, and he received treatment for it at the hospital on the Atsugi base from September 16th through September 29th. These medical records are not compatible with the timeline of Oswald's whereabouts provided by the Warren Report in their Commission Exhibit number 1961, which shows all the locations and corresponding dates of where and when Oswald served in the military. The problem here is that there's strong evidence that Oswald really was in Taiwan at the time, just like the Warren Report says. In addition to CE 1961 and the witnesses author Edward Epstein interviewed, we have the Marine Corps Unit Diary number 151-58, which shows that Oswald and his unit departed from Japan on September 14th aboard the USS Catamount. Once he was in the Soviet Union, Oswald told journalist Priscilla Johnson that he had spent time in Formosa while he was in the Marines. Formosa is the older name for Taiwan. On top of that, there are multiple declassified naval messages saying that Oswald served in Taiwan. Putting all of this together, we have medical documents that show Oswald was receiving treatment in Atsugi on 5 occasions during the time he was supposed to be at sea or in Taiwan. But we also have lots of internal military documents that show Oswald was, in fact, in Taiwan, which is what the Warren Report relied on. We then have the memorable story about Oswald freaking out while he was on guard duty and shooting wildly into the woods, which is the cherry on top that is supposed to show that Oswald was in Taiwan. Here's where the "was Oswald in Taiwan or wasn't he" dilemma gets even wilder. In 1978, investigators for the House Select Committee on Assassinations found out about the medical records showing that Oswald received treatment for gonorrhea in Atsugi when he was supposed to be in Taiwan. So the HSCA Chief Counsel Robert Blakey wrote to Secretary of Defense at the time, Harold Brown, and asked, quote, during which periods was Oswald separated from his units overseas because of hospitalization. Blakey then explained the basis of the question, which was the conflicting evidence between the medical records showing Oswald at Atsugi and the Marine Corps Unit diaries, which showed that he was in Taiwan at the same time. A few weeks later, the Department of Defense responded by saying, quote, Oswald did not sail from Yokosuka, Japan on September 16, 1958. He remained at Naval Station Atsugi as part of the MAG-2 Rear Echelon. Relying on this letter from the Department of Defense, the HSCA found that Oswald never went to Taiwan at all. The HSCA said, quote, "It does not appear that he spent any time in Taiwan." This finding is contrary to that of the Warren Commission, but the Commission analysis was made without access to the unit diaries of Oswald's unit. This whole question of was Oswald in Taiwan is one of the most mysterious topics surrounding his time in the military. There's overwhelming evidence that he was in Taiwan. We have the unit diaries, the statement from Lieutenant Rhodes, who found Oswald after he had shot into the woods, Oswald's own references to being in Taiwan while talking to reporters, and several declassified naval communications about Oswald's background once he was in the Soviet Union. They all say that he was in Taiwan. On the other hand, you have just a few pages of medical records showing that Oswald was still in Atsugi. The notion that the Department of Defense would overrule the Warren Commission to the HSCA and say that Oswald never went to Taiwan at all makes no sense given all of the competing evidence that establishes that he was in Taiwan. Whatever the end result of all this confusion ends up being, the fact of the matter is we may never really know if he was in Taiwan or if he stayed in Atsugi. But this is just one portion of Oswald's time in the Marines, and we'll find more contradictory examples as this portion of this investigation goes on. We will be examining more details regarding Oswald's time in the Marine Corps as the series progresses, and I can assure you there are going to be a lot more very odd instances where things just don't line up with the official narrative set forth by the Warren Commission.